Hey guys, Emma here. Today I'm going to take you on a project that I started and I thought it was going to be a quick weekend bathroom renovation flip. I have been kind of daydreaming about painting this guest bathroom yellow in some capacity for basically the whole time we've owned this house, so since 2022. And I finally decided that this weekend was the weekend I was going to pull the trigger. And the inspiration for this is a vintage yellow striped pool lounger. I wanted it to feel retro and kind of funky and eclectic and bring you just kind of like a nostalgia that I had growing up. My grandpa was a plumber on my mom's side, and he had these pool loungers that he made out of PVC plumbing, and we had these pads for them. One was like a charcoal gray brown kind of color, almost black, and then the other one was like this mustardy beautiful yellow. And I spent many summer days laying out in there sunbathing and reading books and enjoying it. And I can't for the life of me find a photo of it, but if I eventually do, in years worth of photos, I will probably frame it and put it in this bathroom as a homage to my grandpa, who is no longer with us here on the earth, but I think he would probably love the inspiration for this bathroom. I looked at some YouTube videos and watched other people do taping methods like this to do a stripe. I am going for regular painter's tape. I think it's 1.5 inches to 2 inches, something like that. And I'm doing one painter's tape width separate for each stripe. That's specifically the look I wanted to go for. I did debate doing wider stripes and variations of it, but I ended up really loving the single painter's tape stripe look. I ended up using a level that I posted across the room to get a nice straight line. I used one little tiny strip of tape to be able to create my marker for width. And then I just continued that method throughout the entire bathroom. It took me over 4.5 hours to do this bathroom. And for reference, I would say this bathroom is probably like 6 by 8. It's a relatively small guest bathroom. It has a tub shower and it's all tiled. So really the only sections that needed to be done was the 3 walls that are outside of the tub area. And despite that being the only square footage, it took a very long time. And there were some complex corners and around some of the other features in the bathroom. But despite that, I basically went through the taping process. And when I did the research, the taping is really to get you the lines that you want, but the risk is the bleed. So this bathroom was a millennial gray when I started. The entire house, actually, when we purchased it, was like all the same shade of a light gray. And so I had to do 2 coats of the base white paint to get the background stripe, the white stripe. So I did the entire bathroom, every wall, 2 coats of white paint. Then I did the 4.5 hours of taping once that paint, those 2 layers of paint dried. And then you'll see here that I started the process. So you actually, in order to do this look, you need to have, to reduce the risk of bleeding, you need to paint over all of the tape with the undercoat, so the background stripe. So in this case, it is a white stripe. So I had to use 2 coats of white paint over all of the painted stripe lines on the walls. So to recap, that's 2 coats of white paint to create the base. Then I did the 4.5 hours of taping on the 3 walls that you see. And then I did 2 coats of white paint to go over all of the painter's tape stripes around the entire perimeter of the room. It took me 8 different samples of yellow Benjamin Moore paint to come up with this particular paint color, which I love. I will put the name of the paint from Benjamin Moore up on the screen for you guys. And the reason I chose this was because I wanted it to be saturated. I wanted it to be bright. I wanted it to feel retro and colorful. And I didn't want it to feel faded or like I had put in all this effort just to get a pale yellow. I wanted it to be standout, intense, vintage pool lounger yellow. I wanted it to be distinct. And I feel like to get the retro vibe, it needed to be saturated and like this drenched kind of color vibe. When I selected this color, I just decided to go for it, kind of full send. So then I had to go over all of the area that I did the 2 coats of white paint over the tape with 2 coats of yellow paint. And I used basically a brush to do all of the cutting in around the edges and around any shapes like the light fixtures and things like that. And then I used a roller for the rest of it. Now, having hindsight seen how I did still have some bleed lines, I did wonder if using a paintbrush up and down the edge of the painter's tape would have been the right choice, and maybe the roller didn't apply enough pressure on the tape, which is why I still got a little bit of bleed at the end, but it's hard to say. Obviously, I can't go back and test it again, but I did end up using the brush on the edges, and I still felt like I got occasionally a bleed line, despite how many layers of paint I put in this bathroom. I had no idea when I started this project how long the taping and the painting and how many layers it would take. Like, in my brain, I envisioned it being so much less work, and I thought because the bathroom was so small that it would be relatively easy, but that was not the case. So we just, this 1 weekend project kind of turned into a 3 weekend project. I was also doing this project a lot of the time about 8 or 9 o'clock at night after my husband, who fishes in the summertime, went to bed. And so a lot of times I was in my pajamas either a weekend morning or in the evenings at 9 p.m. In this room, kind of doing this project in the background quietly. As I started to pull the painter's tape down, I was so nervous, you guys, and there was a few hiccups, which I'll go over here shortly, but overall, I was blown away. So now when I did watch other videos and people talk about how to do this process, they did say that pulling from the top and pulling at a 45-degree angle was the best way to reduce peeling or any kind of like issues with the paint pulling or the tape being pulled off of the paint. So I did keep that in mind. I tried to apply that throughout. So just starting from the top of every strip of paint, pulling all the way down to the bottom at that 45-degree angle. As I pulled the tape down, I did notice that there was, some bleed marks, which I'll go over and I'll show you kind of the details of that. And I should mention that it ended up taking me, I think, 3.5 rolls of painter's tape, almost 4, actually, by the time it was all said and done for these 3 walls. So if you're doing a big room, I would almost rather do an accent wall, just one wall of painter's tape stripes. When I'm talking about issues with the bleeding, this is kind of what I'm referring to. It's just little tiny dots. I'm basically going to go around with my edging brush and just touch up these little spots here and there so it looks really clean. This is the type of stuff that I'm talking about. It is like, and this is the biggest, worst one right below my towel hook. I feel like maybe it was like a moisture issue or something, because the white paint just doesn't even want to stick on top of that gray, and even some of the gray paint peeled off. So I'm going to need to scratch this all off and retouch that up. And then there's some edging that needs to happen, like around items that I was kind of trying to work around with the tape. I realized that I was going to pull these drywall plugs, and then I never did. And I don't think the mirror that I got is wide enough to cover those 2 drywall plugs. So I actually need to remove these and repair the drywall. And then you can see a couple other times where the paint, only on the white, peeled right off that gray paint. So I'm not sure why that is, but I would say, looking around, 90% impressed. Like, these lines look pretty good. And then you can see there's just little tiny bleed marks here and there. After doing the stripes, I had the initial idea to do color drenching, so to do the actual ceiling yellow. And you guys, that was 100% the right decision. As soon as I started to paint the ceiling yellow, I knew I had made the right decision. It totally changed how I felt about the stripes. It solidified that I had made the right decision. I just felt like the ceiling being yellow really kind of like embodied the concept that I wanted. It embodied the retro kind of funky pool lounger feel. It made it so that when you walk into the room, it felt like a certain like a feeling, and not just like paint on the wall. It felt like it was like a vibe, which is what I really wanted. And I definitely feel like doing the ceiling yellow was what, put the nail in the coffin. And that shade of yellow being so saturated and dark and beautiful was just the absolutely right call. Now, one thing I did take into consideration when choosing this yellow was this window is a north-facing window. It's also very small in this bathroom. So this is one of the darkest rooms in our house, actually. And the north side of our house is also one of the darkest areas of our house in general. So I didn't have a ton of natural light. So I just had to keep that in mind when I was testing out all the paint colors, which is why I was having such a hard time and had to go through so many different samples of paint to find the right one, because the lighting in this room was just harder than I expected. Since I'd gone through all the effort to update the paint and make this room feel a certain way, I wanted to do the final touches. So I ended up purchasing a new light that would go above the mirror. And I wanted to potentially do like a funky retro lamp. But then our house, because this was such a strong statement, I felt like I needed to kind of keep it more similar to the rest of our house. Our whole house has this black matte hardware, and I do really, in general, like it. And so I ended up purchasing off of Amazon just a black matte, kind of modern aesthetic light fixture, and reinstalling that. Took me at one extra trip to the hardware store, but we finally got that done. The ceiling fan I wasn't able to change out because of the inset of it. I need a specific brand, and I didn't like any of the models that they had for updating it, so we just left that as is. And then the last kind of finishing touches was adding a new plant with a new pot that kind of drawed in the pink. Additionally, adding the mirror that I ordered from West Elm, which I will link in the description below. Also from West Elm was the shower curtain, which I will also link in the description below. And then lastly, updating the hardware on the bathroom vanity to pink to kind of draw the pinks, teals, and yellows all together to give it kind of that final feel. Absolutely love how this project turned out. I hope you guys enjoy watching this project be completed. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you later.